Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I trust you can hear me at the back there. Fantastic. Well, first of all, thank you very much for joining us this morning here at the Radisson. I know it's an early morning, an early start for all of us, and I know we all have busy schedules, but thank you very much for attending. I'm sure you'll agree, once PJ has had a chance to chat, that the topic is actually, it's very, very relevant. As I sit next to Eric and to PJ, my eyes are getting bigger and bigger and more concerned and more intimidated by the CPA, which PJ is going to talk to shortly. Excuse me. I think, from my perspective, South Africa has many well-intentioned acts, not all of which are terribly practical, and I think we'll see that this one is going to fit into that category. So, as I said, I'm intimidated by it as clients and as entrepreneurs, and on the other end of the scale as consumers. I think we're all intimidated by it. Hence the idea or the initiative to introduce experts in the field, such as PJ, which can help us unpack and understand these. We hear about it in the media. We don't understand it. I certainly don't. So I think all of us will have a chance shortly to hear exactly how this act is going to impact on us. Which brings me to introduce our guest speaker, our expert in the field. And as I sit next to him, I realize he is an expert because there's some terribly draconian sections to this act. PJ currently is a partner in the law firm Gillen and Veldhuizen Incorporated, situated in Westlake in Cape Town. They operate as a boutique commercial law firm servicing a niche market of corporate clients. Excuse me. He holds there's a lot of initials here. He holds a B.Proc from UNISA and an LLM from UCT in commercial law. He's currently completing an MBA at UNISA. He currently sits on the Specialist Commercial and Tax Law Committee of the Cape Law Society and has been responsible for leading a delegation in conjunction with SAICA to the Minister of Trade and Industry on issues related to the amendment and implementation of the New Companies Act. That's another act I'm sure we're going to talk about in time to come. He's an active member of the IOD, CLASA, which he can explain, the Cape Regional Chamber of Commerce, and holds the position of Vice President of the Southern Suburbs Attorneys Association. PJ is married to Margaret, and they have 2 sons and a daughter, Thomas, Nicholas, and Emily. His hobbies include, and if you've seen his photo on his website, you'll understand these. His hobbies include surfing and rock climbing. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to somebody who I think is not your ordinary attorney and fits quite nicely into one of our special guests. Thank you, PJ.
Morning to all of you. Just a bit of housekeeping before we get going. I'm not a university lecturer, so please, I'm not going to stand up here and talk to the slides. I'm going to talk to you. I need you to be interactive and ask questions. As I was sitting chatting to Eric now, we both agree we've all been to many of these talks, and we learn from each one of them. It's something I learn from you, you learn from me. I end up going back to my office and re-looking at the act and wondering whether what I said yesterday was in fact the way we should still look at it today. So it's one of these evolving acts. And as we were talking about earlier, we sit in an environment in South Africa where there's been an ever-changing pace of legislation, and we've seen it in our own firm. We used to be a general practitioner firm, and we realized if you don't scale down and study the new legislation that's coming out, which is taking over the corporate world, eventually the advice you're going to give is negligent. And we as a firm have decided that the Companies Act, the Consumer Protection Act, and the National Credit Act are the only things that we can really talk to with any confidence and stay abreast of. This act is not yet final insofar as the regulations haven't yet been promulgated. Those were promised to us in mid-July, and they're not yet with us. Certain parts of the Act are already in operation, and I'll talk to that shortly. But the main portion of the Act becomes operational on the 24th of October. The Act has been around for some time. There's been quite a bit of media coverage on it, and people and businessmen have been encouraged to prepare themselves for it because it has far-reaching consequences. What I also must say is that this is a helicopter view of only the fundamental rights of the consumer in the Act. Each section of this Act could be a day lecture on its own. So I will try and field your questions insofar as we can within the time limits that we've got. But if there are any direct questions, I'm happy that I can chat to you afterwards, or you can email me, or you can give me a tinkle at my practice or on my cell. All right. Firstly, why the need for this act? The Department of Trade and Industry felt that there's been no substantial review of consumer law since 1989, where they had an act called the Unfair Business Practices Act. There was fragmented regulations with regard to consumers throughout a number of acts which consumers could approach consumer watchdog bodies to try and deal with their suppliers. There's this perception that South Africa, as a first world, a country with first world cities and as an emerging market in third world interiors, has been lagging behind first world jurisdictions. So if we look at much of the legislation that we see today, it's to bring us in line with the European partners that we want to trade with and with the United States. The DTI was also concerned with the unequal bargaining power between suppliers. We were talking earlier with some people at my table over there about franchises, for example, are involved in the act and considered consumers. And the way that franchisors have heretofore dealt with franchisees simply has been on an absolutely uneven and shaky ground, that if you had a right that you wish to exercise against a franchisor, for example, he would simply terminate your franchise agreement. And it's what this act seeks to redress, is that unequal bargaining power. If you want what I'm selling, sign here, you take it as it is, you've got no right of recourse against me, etc., etc., etc. And it goes back to the way South Africa has transformed since 1994, where a large segment of our community and population is an unsophisticated population, and they have been abused by the suppliers. Think, just in our own realms, think of gym contracts. You know, there was a gym many years ago who subsequently insolvent now, but your contract ran on and on and on and on and on. You went to a party on New Year's Eve, you had a New Year's resolution, by the 3rd of January you'd bought a gym contract, by the 3rd of January 4 years later you'd been twice, you'd paid about 5,000 or 6,000 rand, and you were never ever going to get out of that contract. Familiar? That's what they're trying to avoid, these sort of rollover provisions. There's also the unfair practices and scams that we see. I don't know how this act is going to deal with the criminal element that we see coming through our inboxes every day on our email, but that is one of the stated aims of the Department of Trade and Industry. The further objects are, they want to establish a mechanism for the consumer to be able to protect his rights. So we won't just have the usual court system now where, you know, if I suffer harm, I go to an attorney, or to the small claims court if it's under the 7,000 rand. I go to a court, I issue a summons, I eventually have the matter adjudicated upon. Costly, lengthy time periods, not really workable from a commercial perspective, especially when you see the kind of plethora of litigation that will probably flow from this act. What they're setting up is specialist courts, specialist tribunals, and special mechanisms of how this is going to operate. What they also have opened for the first time in South Africa